Go ahead, Padmaja.
Hello, everyone. I'm Padmaja Sarathy. I am excited to be here, and I'm absolutely delighted that you are joining me. I know you have multiple choices, especially now with so many webinars. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm honored. So, this topic is positive approaches to addressing problem behaviors of students with severe disabilities. I do feel a little uncomfortable using the term severe and disability. However, in order to qualify for services, you have, in the United States, you have to be identified with a disability. So the phrase severe disabilities could include students with autism or intellectual disability or other health impairment qualifying in any one of those areas and then being eligible for services. So this is a two-part series. And what are we going to be looking at and examining, evaluating, and learning in these two-part series? We all know that problem behaviors interfere with the students' learning. It interferes with their educational advancement, and it also impacts negatively their interactions with peers and with the adults who work with them or who surround them. And ultimately, it impacts school success, and it could also impact their life success itself. So we are going to be looking at what is it that we can do proactively so that we can provide a kind of a supportive environment so that before the behavior escalates, we can prevent it. And then one of the things we have to be constantly asking is, are the current strategies we are using really making an impact? Is it making a difference? Is the student stopping that inappropriate behavior? So we need to ask what is working. And if it is not working, we have to change that. And at the same time, when we use an approach and it is not changing the behavior, we need to teach the student new behavior. So I'm going to be sharing with you replacement behaviors. And then finally, we have to maximize the rewards the student gets from behaving appropriately. That is just as important. So we'll be looking at that also. And I will be sharing with you a number of student scenarios so that you will see how these things that I have just shared with you are implemented in a classroom situation. And I have a couple of scenarios today in great detail. I'll be presenting about them. And then I will have multiple scenarios next time so that our focus is on using positive, proactive, and functional behavior intervention strategies. So in this webinar today, we are looking much more about proactive practices. We are going to be focusing on how do we create a supportive environment and what does it look like so that it reduces those problem behaviors, possibly before it escalates. And then we will be looking at the personalized, positive, proactive strategies, replacement behaviors, and maximizing the rewards in one specific case and also in another related kind of another case example. And we will also be doing some reflection on why we pursue somewhat of a punitive approach when we see that it doesn't really work. And are we really teaching the student replacement behavior skills he or she needs so that the problem behaviors are not effective for the student? In the next webinar, in part 2, we'll be looking much more about transition. When children, especially children with autism, are making transitions from one activity to another, or one setting to another, or one person to another. That may provoke certain challenging behaviors. How do we address that? And then sometimes it is the communication issues, communication difficulties that lead to problem behaviors. How do we address that? And then in some cases, it may be self-injurious behavior that causes us considerable concern. So we'll be looking at that also briefly. And then finally, we want students to be able to self-manage their aggressive behaviors. So what techniques can we use? And I'm going to be sharing with you in detail about one research-based technique. And throughout, I'll be sharing helpful tips. So let's find out who is joined us today for this webinar. So are you a general education teacher, special education teacher, administrator, speech pathologist, or other support staff? Or I am hoping parents have joined us too, because at no time is this webinar as relevant as today, as we are on the cusp of starting a new school year. Okay, I think most of you have responded to the poll. I don't know, I'm not able to share the poll results for some reason.
I did share the results, Padmaja.
You did?
Yep,
Okay.
It looks like we have about 37% special educators.
Yeah, I see that. I see that now.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay. It is, it's not letting me.
I did close the poll, Padmaja.
But I did, and for some reason, it won't let me move on. So I may have to go back and come back in. I'm sorry about that. Why? I don't know why. I'm still not.
Are you on your desktop for the PowerPoint?
Yes, I am. I may have to, I apologize for this little problem. Okay, I'm so sorry for that little glitch. Now, a little bit of information about myself. I have been an educator in terms of, I have been a teacher, both special ed and general ed. I have been an educational diagnostician, and I've also worked as a special education coordinator, supervising special education programs. In the last 16 years, I've been an educational consultant, trainer, and I've also had the good fortune to write a number of books, and these are all the books that I have written. And today's workshop will draw from the book on autism, severe and multiple disability a little bit, and the behavior guide that came out last year, and also a more recent publication which came out this year on mindfulness, and also the book on executive function. These are all the sources that I have drawn from for this presentation. So problem behaviors, we all know that it interferes with learning. It interferes with the students' learning in a variety of areas. cognitive, communication, social emotional behavior, and how to interact with peers. And especially with younger children, it really puts them on a kind of a trajectory that impacts them more or less throughout their school life. So it actually, we have to start addressing behavior issues positively from early years. So we need to, especially when children, or we use a kind of a punitive approach and try to send them to timeout or to isolation frequently, what happens to a child? If the child misses out on instruction, the child misses out on social interaction, the child misses out on learning how to interact with adults and peers, and they fail to learn how to be part of a group. So that is why behavior is extremely important to address, and address proactively and positively. And at no time is it as important as this current moment, because when children have missed school for so many months, and when they get back and they have been, some of them have gone through severe trauma even, and some of them have not had maybe a predictable routine, because it is not predictable when you don't get to school and don't have that same set of sequence of activity. So there are a variety of challenges children have faced. So that may also impact them. So it is even more important for us to be calm and patient and use proactive strategies when they return to school, whenever that may be. Maybe right now in the next few weeks, or maybe in a few months. And many students make great strides when we adults, we educators, we therapists, and all the people who are responsible for that child's education, the educational team, work closely with the families to peel back the students' defensive layers so that the child is on a positive trajectory. Then children will begin to show their softer sides. So first and foremost, of course, we have to understand where the behavior comes from. We have to begin with defining the behavior in measurable and observable. Precisely, we have to define that behavior. That's our first step, because that is when we can decide on what kind of a consequence outcome the child will get. And when we develop a hypothesis based on the behavior data that we have collected, what happens, when it happens, where does it happen, and why, the antecedents that precede that behavior. When we collect a detailed, comprehensive data, the final summary will culminate in the functional behavior assessment data. So that is one of the first steps. And then we have to think in terms of, how do we define that behavior? How is it observable? What is the student doing? Did the student throw a pencil? Did he or she refuse to complete a task? Fighting with another student? Because when we say things like, he was aggressive, or she was non-compliant, oh, she refused to listen to me, she is disobedient, it is not clear what exactly the student was engaged in. And only when we define that very clearly and precisely can we think of a consequence that is appropriate for that student. And as I said right at the beginning, we have to think in terms of what proactive strategies can we use, what replacement skills we need to teach, and how do we maximize the clear reward for that student. And then we also need to carefully look at what is causing, what is triggering that problem behavior. And we will be looking into it even more in greater detail as we go along in this webinar. Is a transition? Is the student, usually we think in terms of the student is either seeking attention or is the student escaping the activity. But there are also, in that, there are also other side issues like, is it the teacher direction too complex for that student? Is the task too difficult? Is the environment too overloading for that student? Or is there some confusion about the task? Or is it the student's communication difficulty that is impacting? Or is there an issue like stress and anxiety that is impacting the student? So these are all things we need to clearly examine. And then we have to think in terms of the proactive approach, what outcome the student gets. Is the student receiving a reward, a reinforcement? What is happening? Is the student trying to escape? What is the matter today? I'm having some problem. Okay, now we have another poll. What kind of problem behaviors do you frequently encounter? I'm talking about more serious type of problems here. The student is running around the classroom, or the student hits or kicks or pinches the peers. Usually it's often the adult the student may be working with, cries, screams, kicks, and has a meltdown, pushes away the objects or items placed in front of the student, or the student may let out a scream when another child, another peer, this usually happens maybe in a preschool classroom, when the child's favorite toy is touched by another student, or the another student wants that, or maybe as simple as pushing another student who is in line. Okay, I see that a lot of you do experience crying, screaming, kicking, and has a meltdown. Okay, you are at the right place, because this is what we are going to be kind of talking about, and I will also address it in my next webinar. That's why this information is very helpful. So the student runs around the classroom, hits and kicks, okay, throws, pushes objects placed in front of the student. Okay. Okay, I hope I don't have the problem again. It looks like I have to go back each time. I apologize for this mess that's happening. I don't know why. Okay. One of the things I wanted to mention is I'm doing some research for a second edition of my book on autism. And I came across several reports. And I found it pretty shocking, because I found that severe punishment are being used even for minor infractions. I'm sure none of you use these kind of a punitive approach, but I think it is important for us to be aware that these are things that are being pursued. And quite often, I think what happens is a behavior that starts off in a kind of what I would call a mild misbehavior often escalates, maybe because of the adult response. In one case, there was a 9-year-old with autism. The child was placed in a duffel bag and tied up and treated like trash. This is what the mother had reported. And it just says alleged misbehavior. In another case, this was more recent. A child was placed in seclusion, that is in the isolation room, for 5 hours. And many of these children, by the way, were fairly young children. When I say young, they were in the elementary school or frequently even in preschool classroom. Children were placed in secluded spaces daily. This was from a report on the Tribune ProPublica investigation into Illinois schools. And the misdemeanor was for refusing to do class work, for swearing, for spilling milk, for throwing Lego blocks. So you can imagine some of these children were definitely preschool, pre-K children. And sometimes the severe punishment was used for being disrespectful, profane language, or not following rules. And in another state, in another situation, this was in Fairfax County schools, students were frequently restrained and secluded repeatedly. And this is kind of shocking. The same child was confined to a room almost 100 times in a school year. I don't know how many, that's kind of shocking that out of maybe 180 days, 185 days, 100 times. And then another was restrained 745 times. So I know these are severe cases, but we really need to reflect, how are we responding to problem behaviors? And the other interesting thing is the Civil Rights Data Collection, CRDC, shows that students with special needs, students with disabilities, are being disproportionately restrained and secluded. They make up, students with disabilities make up 12% of the population, but make up 77 and 66% of children who are restrained and secluded. So very high percentage are restrained and secluded. So this is time for us, especially now, before children get back to school, because we are likely to maybe see some of these problem behaviors even increase because of what has happened. Children have been out of a routine, and it may take them a lot of time to adjust back to the routine and to, demonstrate appropriate behavior. So it's time for us to reflect. What is it that is driving the children to engage in these behaviors? Do they want to escape the activity? Is the activity not engaging? Is it boredom? Or is it because they are not actively involved during the lesson? So there is something we can do about that. Or they're trying to seek attention. Or they're making like attention grabbing noises, or they're grabbing and pinching while working maybe one-on-one with the adult. Or is the task too difficult? Maybe tears up a math worksheet. Or is the environment overstimulating? And I have been in classrooms as a consultant, and I have seen frequently either there is a visual overload in the classroom, or the student may have to go to the gym, and that large area may be causing some stress and anxiety for that student. So those kind of things also we need to look at. Or in some cases, is the student moving from an activity that's a preferred activity? Maybe the student likes to work on the computer and has to move to somewhere we are providing instruction. How do we handle that? A non-preferred activity. What are some other triggers? Is it because the student faces a new person, maybe a substitute teacher, that particular day or that particular week? How have we prepared the student? Is it a new situation? Is the student going to a community-based instruction trip? And is that the first time, maybe? And sometimes, even if it is not the first time, for some students, that itself can be challenging. Or is it a new setting? Or is it the assembly? So or is it a large gathering? Or is the student asked to stop an activity and move to another activity? And that often happens when they are transitioning from circle to center, computer to group instruction, or from recess back to classroom, or even arrival and dismissal. So is it the unpredictability of what's going to happen, or is it the student's stress and anxiety level, not being sure of what to expect in the next activity? And children with autism and children with ADHD have a very high stress level. They constantly experience that. So is it difficulty with communicating needs and wants? They're feeling overstimulated, but they don't have the words to communicate and say, I am experiencing discomfort, I'm experiencing pain, and they are not unable to request help. Or is it because of poorly developed executive function skills, attention difficulties, which makes it difficult for them to focus attention and filter out the distraction and to be involved in whatever the teacher is teaching? Or is it transition related issues? So what are the triggers? That's also we have to carefully look at. And then we have to reflect on what is it that drives a punitive response from adults? What is it? Because of our belief that punishment will teach the student a lesson and will prevent the student from exhibiting those problem behaviors? Is that the traditional approach? Is that why we use a punitive response? Or do we see a behavior that we don't approve of, and we often react immediately to the situation instead of ourselves calming down and making a more reflective response? What is it? Is it our belief that flexibility and accommodation on part of the teacher, on part of the adult, or part of whoever is working with that student or that classroom, does that mean it's a poor discipline approach if we use flexibility and accommodation? Or when we provide alternate choices to the student, do we interpret it as giving in to the student? To demonstrate that the adults are in control in the classroom, do we try to exercise control by using a punitive approach so that it will reflect better on the teachers or the educator or whoever is the person in that classroom, or whether it is the paraeducator who is working with the student? Does that reflect better on the classroom management when we use an immediate punitive approach? Okay, you're going to time out. Or, if the timeout has not worked, maybe they're sent to the office for isolation, and they may spend hours there. And also we have to remember, and there is research clearly showing this, sending the student to timeout or isolation, out of the room, and sometimes even within the room, as long as the student is away from the area of instruction, it is actually reinforcing to the adult as well. It is reinforcing to the student because he or she is escaping the activity, but it's also reinforcing to the student, to the adult who is working with the student, that's usually the teacher, because it gives him or her a break from having to deal with the challenging behaviors, and she or he feels they can continue with the instruction, and that instruction will not be disrupted. And it is a very difficult situation. I appreciate and I understand, but let's look at some positive ways to address that. So, as I said, the most important thing all of us have to think about is prevention. Prevention is the best approach. What are some things we can push under this prevention? What can we do to prevent those problem behaviors? The first and foremost, most important, is to create a positive, welcoming classroom and climate where everybody belongs. And one of the things I do want to mention here is when a student enters the classroom and the student feels welcome and the classroom climate is positive, how the student feels that early in the morning, let's say, it's going to impact how the student behaves and how the student learns the rest of that day. So we do want very positive teacher-student relationships. One of the things that I heard a couple of days ago when I was attending a webinar was children who have ADHD, they hear, this was a number that was cited, they hear about 10,000 negative comments compared to other children. So I'm not sure exactly if that's the number, but that was the number that was cited. So we have to be conscious of the fact that children who hear a lot of the negative comments do feel negative, and their self-concept is negatively impacted. So we have to be watchful of what we say and what we do. And so it is important to have classroom rules that are simple and teach them, especially with deliberately, especially for students who are exhibiting some problem issues. And then what we need to do is to have close supervision and monitoring. In other words, when a student is beginning to engage in fidgety behaviors, is looking a little bit restless, can we intervene and prevent and provide some positives? And we will be going through this in the case example I'm going to share with you. And can we increase our contingent praise for the student? Do we also make sure we promote the student's active engagement? The learner has to be actively engaged during the lesson. That means the lessons we provide has to be engaging, involve all of the student, and provide an opportunity for the student to respond. We have to provide multiple opportunities for students to increase their responses. And frequently we think those students who are sitting still and who are behaving appropriately, who are able to filter out their distraction, are the ones we need to call on because they are sitting so nicely. And often those who are fidgety and restless, we usually do not call on them. But those are the ones who are begging to be involved, and we need to involve them and include them and give them opportunity so that they will feel that they belong and they need to be there and they will focus attention. And we have to provide positive feedback and make error correction and monitor the progress. All of these help with the prevention. And I particularly want to mention children with autism because children with autism experience quite a bit of behavior issue, and many of them do experience a lot of seclusion and restraint and severe consequences for their behavior. Children with autism, as I right at the beginning I mentioned, they experience a lot of stress and anxiety. And they also experience a lot of discomfort when there are some environmental conditions that are present, like a noisy classroom, or there are too many children around them, or other children in close proximity, or if there are large open spaces, or if the classroom environment is overstimulating with a lot of visual overload and everywhere around them, there are visuals, too many visuals, then they are not able to eliminate that. So all of those things cause problems for students with autism. And also they have certain specific characteristics, and we need to understand their behavioral characteristics, their social, emotional characteristics, and their way of learning, cognition, and their academic preferences and characteristics, and their communication needs, difficulties, and preferences. And they may have certain motor needs too, some sensory needs. So all of these we have to understand and then address them as part of our addressing the problem behaviors. Because some of the common rage triggers for children with autism, according to Brenda Smith-Miles, is sometimes it's as simple as being ordered to do something, told not to do something, being asked to do multiple things. So these are all things. So we do have to devise ways creatively to address some of these issues so that they are there, present in the classroom and learning, and their behavior is, appropriate. One of the things I do want to mention, we often use timeout. I mean, it's used frequently. As a matter of fact, I would prefer to even not call it a timeout. I would prefer to have instead of a timeout location, have instead a calming space, a safe space, and many of you may be already using safe space instead of timeout. And if you're, congratulations to you. And also we have to teach the children how to use the calming space, how to calm down, what tools and techniques they can use. We cannot just send them to the safe space and calming space and say, okay, you're going to be there 5 minutes, or you set a timer, 10 minutes. But what the recommended practice is for the guideline for the length of time is 1 minute for every year of the student's age. So if you're looking at a student who is 6 years old, no more than 6 minutes in that calming space, and we really have to teach. So that, having said that, what are some other instructional and emotional supports do we have to provide for students in order to exhibit appropriate behaviors? Especially for students with autism, we have to make sure we have visual supports. And these supports are consistently implemented in various settings, whether we are in the gym, or whether we are in the classroom, or whether we are walking down the hallway. We have to make sure we are using visual schedule, visual support. And one of the visual supports is that what you see there, it is the rule cue cards. And this is a simple set of few cards with some pictures that shows important rules to follow, not the entire visual schedule, which also you may want to carry, but this is something, this is very handy. You carry it with you wherever you are, whether you are going into the cafeteria, whether you're going into the gym, or arrival, dismissal, all of that. Some simple 3 or 4 rules, maybe. If they are small cards, you have the picture, you take it with you wherever you go, and you remind the student and you show the student that as you're walking to that location, or as you begin and then as you walk, you're showing. The other thing that would help is for a student who is exhibiting problem behaviors and is reaching out and touching other students, or hurting other students, and I'm going to share with you in much greater detail about it in the case example of kind of creating a visual boundary and teaching personal space. Personal space is maintaining 2 feet space between the student and the others. And a visual schedule. We definitely need a visual schedule. You may be using a kind of a paper, or you may be using it on a tablet, but make sure that this is consistently used, and that activities to do and activities done are regularly changed and modified to reflect that. And make sure you have a designated safe space in the classroom. And as I pointed out, we have to monitor the time. It has to be timed, and the student has the opportunity to return back to instruction as much as possible. And then for us, one of the things is, first you do the work. It may be even a very short time in the beginning as you are training the student. It may be a very short time. The student maybe sits in that group for 10 minutes or 8 minutes before he goes and works on the computer for 5 minutes. So we don't abuse either of that. We don't let the student spend 20 minutes in front of the computer, which is maybe the student's preferred activity, and then he sits in group for 5 minutes. So they both have to be balanced, and we do give that choice, but one is done first, and then the second one is kind of earned. So some of the other things, we have to make sure opportunity for movement during the day. One of the important things is movement helps to flow more blood to the brain. It helps with cognition, and it changes the student's mood. How they feel affects how they perform, as I mentioned earlier. And music and movement and kind of, it creates a joyful break. You don't have to spend 20 minutes. It may be just 3 to 5 minutes of movement. And that 3 to 5 minutes of movement can create a positive mood in the student. And when the student gets up and moves, what happens is that exercise boosts your student's mood and it reduces any kind of anxiety and stress they have, and it warms them up to learn. So do infuse music, movement, and some joyful break during the day, several times a day. And another important thing is you want to build your learners' emotional competence. What is that? In other words, you teach the student how to label the feeling and to be able to express the feeling safely. So you can provide a variety of situations. You could have like a group meeting or circle time and teach variety of feelings, happy, sad, to scared, surprised, and being calm, feeling crabby, feeling frustrated, all of these things, and combine it with the situation, either a classroom situation or something that's happened outside. So make it like a role play and drama. So also embed routinely some role play and drama to kind of demonstrate emotions, but also using your stories, because that is again like that little break. It also builds up the student's positive mood. So the positive hormones go up and the student is in a more receptive mood to learn. And I cannot overemphasize visual supports and the consistent use of it. But just as important, as you are teaching, use lots of highly engaging hands-on activities and give as much as possible those students who are exhibiting problem behaviors a turn to be involved. Maybe the student is holding a puppet for that story. Maybe the student is holding some other kind of prop. Maybe the student is holding and showing a page from the book to the rest of the student. The student has a role to play, and you are using a lot of engaging and hands-on activities. So we talked a lot about some proactive environmental supports, strategies that you can use so that the triggering events can be removed or at least minimized. Then we want to teach new skills to the student so that they replace the problem behavior, and then maximize the clear rewards. Now we will move on to some actual classroom student examples. So this is a student that I actually observed in a classroom, and maybe 7.5 years old, maybe almost 8, second grader. He exhibited pretty what I would consider, or what most of you may think, as severe problem behaviors because they were aggressive. And the child was diagnosed with autism. He was able to attend during my observation. He was able to attend and stay in front of the computer independently for more than 15 to 20 minutes. I think actually it was a little too long, but anyway, that's what he was doing. He had very limited communication skills and used picture supports for his communication. What are some of the behaviors that I observed? He refused to stay at his desk when there was a small group lesson, but the students were being instructed one-on-one. In this particular classroom, there were a couple of para-educators as well as the teacher, and the classroom size was very small. But the student, instead of sitting at his desk and working in that small group, he ran around the classroom. He took objects from different places, from the shelves, and threw them. And he also kicked and hit the adults. So this was pretty severe behavior. And the couple of times he seemed to be for a few seconds, maybe once it was just a little bit over a minute, was when he was listening to music and he was sitting on the paraeducator's lap, which I thought was inappropriate. A student was about 7.5, shouldn't be sitting on a teacher's or a paraeducator's lap. And he also completed a puzzle, but that with the teacher working with him one-on-one. That was the one where he was spending maybe a couple of minutes on that simple puzzle. And there was a calming room within the classroom for the student to go to. And he did go, he was sent to that calming room. And there were several bolster of pillows in that room. I'm trying to create that entire environment so that you will get an idea how the classroom looked and what kind of behaviors the student exhibited. After a break in the calming room, he came out and he exhibited the same kind of aggressive behaviors. He was throwing, kicking, hitting, throwing objects, and he was running around, and all that was going on. So what are some student-specific interventions and positive supports we can use with this student? First and foremost, he had a visual schedule, kind of which was not being consistently implemented to show the different activities. It was very broad visual schedule. So he needed some kind of visual support that show him what is the next activity, what he's expected to do, and where. And also another thing in this particular case, or students of this nature, is to watch out for any precursor behavior. If you see fidgetiness, you see swinging legs, or you see feet, or clenching fist, you need to intervene before the behavior escalates and the student starts running around or kicking, hitting, moves out of his seat. You have to watch for that behavior and intervene quickly. So that's why you need close supervision and monitoring. The other thing this particular student and students of this nature need is to tape a boundary around the student's desk. That is his place. And there is a name on his desk, and combined with a photo, combined with his photo or the student's photo on that desk next to his name. And he should be reminded the moment he gets up that he should be in his desk. It should be pointed out. And if you have a picture, that's what it should be. The student sitting at his desk. Take a photo of that, and maybe this alone may take quite a bit of training, but he needs to be trained so that he doesn't get up and move. In addition to that, to prevent him from running, you have to place a stop sign at the door to prevent the student from running. Use the sign to teach him to stop when he reaches the door, to turn around and get back and sit in the chair. And this particular sequence itself may require 3 pictures, but even if you achieve that, of his sitting at his desk and his not running out of the classroom, you have achieved something, because he cannot learn until this behavior is under control. But he also needs that visual support showing him of the change from wherever they were doing, whatever they were doing, to the group activity. Some of the other things that he needs, did I miss? Oh yeah, I didn't. Okay. He has to learn some of the new skills. What to do with his hands. When he reaches out, grabs, he needs to learn hands to yourself. He should need hands on desk and stay in personal space. What is personal space? So as I mentioned right at the beginning, so there is a kind of you mark a space around his desk. You can use a masking tape, and he stays and his feet are within that space and his body is within that space, and this is marked around his desk. So he has to, and within 2 feet, you show him the 2 feet space all around him and in front of him, so that he stays within that space. The other thing, when he gets fidgety, or when students get fidgety and you notice it, one of the things you can remind the student, you can go whisper in the student's ear if necessary, to have kind of sensory fidget toys, like a push ball or a tangle toy or some kind of a key ring that doesn't make any noise, that is not disruptive to the other students, and remind the student prior to his walking away, before he or she engages in the aggressive behavior, remind him to use those fidget toys. And the cue cards I have been talking about, those are the little cards that you see here. You see this here. You use that with visuals. Those are the visuals with paired to remind the student and to teach the student, not just in the classroom setting, but anywhere else. If he goes in the hallway and starts running, he needs to learn. Or if he starts screaming, he needs to learn to stay with the group and to not to scream.
Padmaja,
yes.
You're not currently sharing your slides.
Uh-oh, when did that happen?
It happened quite a bit ago, but I thought maybe you were just having trouble with your
No,
slides, so
no,
you stopped
no,
sharing.
no, no.
So,
Oh, no. I'm so sorry. Should I go back?
no, if you want to just share your desktop again and pick up the slides from the cue cards, that would be great.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Can you see now?
No, it doesn't look like you're sharing your desktop.
Oh, no. What do I do? Okay.
Do you see the share screen button on the bottom?
Yes.
Yep. You'll want to click that.
Yes.
There you go. Now we can see your slides.
I'm so sorry. I never thought I would run into this kind of a problem. I apologize. Do I have to go back, or
No.
I mean, this is the scenario that's very important. These are the behaviors that I explained. I apologize that I haven't encountered this problem before. And these are the student-specific interventions and positive supports. These are the new replacement skills that I talked about. Teach the student what to do with his hands and use real cue cards and rules aided with pictures. And some of the other replacement skills to teach is train the student how to use the personal space that I mentioned. And the other important things for the student, these are all gradual. You're not going to be able to teach all of these skills at the same time, but a few at a time and gradually making progress. And to use social narratives. Many of you would have heard about social skills, and social narratives are the ones you will find in the autism internet modules. And these are simple, scripted stories that you use to teach the student social skills, to keep his hands to himself, for example, and how it impacts others when he reaches and touches them or hurts them. And this student also can benefit from teaching emotional literacy, especially when how it hurts others when he is aggressive, when he is angry, when he is touching, when he is kicking and hurting. And also very, very, very important for the student, especially when there is a calming room in the classroom or a calming space. If you have a calming space, we need to teach our students how to practice these calming techniques and breathing exercises. So it is not enough to have a space. What do we do in that space? Do we use some fidget toys like the push balls and everything that I mentioned about earlier, so that the student, or do we teach the student how to use breathing techniques? How do we ask him to stay calm in that space instead of kicking and hitting and banging on the wall, so that when the student comes out, the student is relaxed? So some of the instructional and communication supports, making the instructional delivery, as I said earlier, highly interactive. using manipulatives, using graphic organizer, using storyboard, and giving the student an opportunity to come and place something on that graphic organizer, place something on the storyboard, using a manipulative that is associated with that activity, and use lots of hands-on activities. And then using real life situation to explain about emotions or to connect with that concept you are teaching. And using communication support aided with assistive technology. And one of the other things that would help in this case of students with significant behavioral needs, as well as communication needs and cognitive needs, is to use a system called the structured work system, where the student works at an independent workstation. He has designated tasks, and the student completes that task. And then after the student completes the task, maybe 2 or 3 work folders, and the student completes independently, these should be concepts or activities that the student is able to do independently, not a new material, but practice material. And then the student moves on to a preferred activity. Offering a visually based approach. That's what the structured work system. And then using things like puppets with younger children. And this is particularly appropriate for this particular student in the 2nd grade special education classroom. And these are a variety of assistive technology tools that can be used. Several of these assistive technology tools are available from AbleNet. And you can also use PowerPoint presentation, that's easily. And these days, there are a variety of apps, technology apps that are available. But of course, you have to be very careful. It has to be based on what the student's skill level is and also the student's preference. And in order to maximize, we talked about the proactive environmental supports. We talked about replacement skills. Now, how do we maximize the rewards for appropriate behavior? Of course, the first thing is we provide positive strokes. We provide encouraging comments, very specific and descriptive, going beyond good job, which is a very generic comment, but saying something very specific about what the student, I liked the way you were sitting and working on your tasks. I liked the way you were paying attention. I liked the way you walked to the door. I liked the way you stayed in your seat. Offer choices. Choice making is very empowering. Do this or do that. But these are choices, not the student chooses. You have made the pre-selection of those choices. And then give those choices. You know, when you student follows a required task with a preferred task. So it's both a reward, but also a kind of requirement. Do embed breaks into the schedule so that the student, many students, when they are learning to sit still and pay attention, they do require a number of breaks. So do maybe, but short breaks, timed breaks. Offer lots of communication opportunities. Teach the student how to ask for assistance, request a break when frustrated, upset. And teach, in the beginning, you may have to really prompt the student, and then gradually, the student will learn how to request help. And as soon as the student asks for help, praise him and provide him the needed assistance. And one of the things that you may want to do is kind of a self-recording chart. But of course, in this particular case of the student, it will come at a later stage, but you may have a student where you can go ahead and begin a self-monitoring chart. And the student earns some points maybe for each time that he demonstrates appropriate sitting and appropriate attending and appropriate behaviors. So this is a kind of a sample, a self-monitoring chart. I'm glad you are able to see the slides now. This would have been a very valuable one for you, most probably. So certain rules you teach, and the student follows those rules, and you pair them with pictures. And these are some kind of almost similar to classroom rules, but these are individual rules. And this is posted on the student's desk. And the student has constant reminder of these goals. And the other one that you can also use, especially in that calming space, is a set of these pictures, what I call calming cards. I'm currently feeling crabby, and then gradually, after taking deep breaths, you're feeling a little kind of somewhere between crabby and cautious, and then gradually you calm down, and then you feel calm. I know we are kind of running out of time. I have a question, Deb. We will go beyond the hour, or should I wait until the next webinar?
How much more do you have, Padmaja?
Another 10, 15 minutes.
I think if you want to go ahead, if people have the time to stay, that's great. Otherwise, it is recorded, and we will have it on YouTube tomorrow. Tomorrow.
I can. Okay. This is another situation. I'm ready to go, so I hope you'll stay with me. This is another situation where this is a first grader. She got into an argument with a substitute teacher. She did not know there was going to be a substitute teacher. So within a few minutes of her arrival, she got it. So immediately she was sent to timeout. Later that day, she had a little bit of a meltdown. She was screaming and shouting and pushing the adult on her way back from music class. And the substitute teacher couldn't tolerate that. And so she sent her to the office as a punishment. And Alice spent, this is the name of the girl, spent the rest of the day in office timeout. And when I say this is the name of the girl, doesn't reflect any individual. It is just a name that I have given. And she missed out on instruction completely the rest of the day. And this happens to this particular child, I was reported, regularly whenever there is a new person or a substitute teacher. So this is a child who has difficulty adjusting to strangers. So what are some things we can do? This is a student who needs preparation ahead of time for the change in personnel. This is a first grader, a 6-year-old, who feels anxious and stressed when there is a stranger she is not used to. So we do need to do that preparation ahead of time so that she doesn't miss out on instruction completely. And that might have prevented the later meltdown too. And we have to understand and respond to the behavior. We have to acknowledge that the student is feeling angry and upset and frustrated because her routine, there has been a change. This is also a student where it is extremely important to build her emotional competence. Label her feelings, teaching her how to label the feeling and how to express them safely. Create a variety of situations to teach that. Using calming cards to identify feelings and how to express them. The calming cards are the pictures that I shared in the previous slide. And the other technique this child will benefit from, or a child of this nature, is what is called a turtle technique. And you will find actually the pictures in the website, Challenging Behavior. This is at the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovation. You will actually find the pictures and you can print out the pictures from that website. What it involves is the step one is the child recognizes that she or he is feeling angry. So at that point, they have to think stop. They have to get into their shell. They have to take deep breath and calm down. That is next step. So recognizing that you're feeling angry, step one, you have to teach this deliberately to the child. thinking stop, and then the child pretends like he or she, like a turtle, gets into the shell and starts thinking and then calms down. What kind of solution can I come up with? And then after a few minutes, after counting breaths maybe, the child comes out of the shell and calm and thinks of solutions to the problem. So another way you can help the student is using stories to build the student's emotional competency. Some of the books that are appropriate for a child who is young is one of the great books is On Monday When It Rained by Cheryl Katzenmeister. Another book that is one of my favorites is When Sophie Gets Angry, Really, Really Angry by Molly Bang. That's an award-winning book. And then you can also teach a situation when the child is happy, a situation when the child may be sad, a situation when the child is angry, a situation when the child is scared. Role play and problem solve these kind of situations so that the child is able to recognize and manage emotions. As a matter of fact, not just this particular child with this specific need, but all children will benefit from this. And some of the do's and don'ts. Gain greater awareness of the distinctive characteristics of children with autism, because their needs and their preferences and their strengths are somewhat distinct. Think about the strengths of students, think about their social communication needs and their academic needs, and make sure our environment is sensory friendly and there is no overload, visual overload. Avoid visual clutter. Prevent students from feeling frustrated. And as much as possible, infuse students' interest, like maybe some movement, maybe some yoga exercises, maybe some use of puppets, some role play, drama. Be flexible. Modify the task demands. If we have a worksheet with 10 problems, maybe the student does 5. If it is something they have to write, maybe you can give them a word bank to help them. So that reduce the frustration, reduce the task demand, reduce the complexity of the task so that the student experiences success. And then gradually you can increase the task complexity. Lots of opportunities to make choices. And then use assistive technology consistently and make sure that assistive technology matches the student's skill level. Instead of having multiple icons, maybe they begin with less number of icons and feel success. And finally, some calming strategies for all of us and for children to learn. And to help all of us to calm down and feel positive, and to reduce the stress level, and to build our resilience. Some of the things that research is clearly showing are what are called mindfulness meditation practices. As a matter of fact, I've just this year, I have published a mindfulness practices, cultivating calmness, concentration, and coping skills through meditation type of practices. Some of the things that you want to be able to do is what is called breathing exercise. I'm going to share with you. I hope you are still there. I apologize for the delay because of my own failure to share the slides. So how do we do this breathing? I'm going to do it in 3 steps. First and foremost, we are going to breathe, and I'm going to walk out so that I can show you, if you can see me. I'm breathing. As I am breathing in, I'm expanding. As I am breathing out, I'm contracting. Breathing in, I'm expanding. Breathing out, I'm contracting. I'm actually, when I place my hand on my stomach, I can feel my tummy going out and going in. So that is something you can practice and you can teach your students. The other thing is alternate nostril breathing. So the way you do that, but before that, it may be helpful for me to even show counting and breathing. And that is, you're counting in, so you're breathing, you are taking in the breath for a count of 4. And then you're holding that breath for a count of 7. And then you're breathing out for a count of 8. I'm going to show you again. I'm breathing in first, count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I hold it for a count of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I am breathing out, that is expelling it for a count of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It is difficult for me to be talking and also breathing in, because what happens is I'm also exhaling and inhaling at the same time. So for a count of 4, I inhale, I hold it for a count of 7, and then I exhale, breathing out for a count of 8. This is something you can personally practice. You can also teach children who are a little bit older, maybe 7 or 8, and it'll be kind of fun. There may be giggle and laughter, but that's good. Now the alternate nostril, that is, I am having my index finger and the middle finger right between the 2 eyebrows, and then the thumb on the right nostril, and then the ring finger and the pinky on the left nostril. So I'm going to show you how to breathe and count at the same time. I'm going to count 4 and I'm breathing in. 1, 2, 3, 4. To a count of 4, I am breathing in. And then I'm holding it for a count of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then I am exhaling or letting it out, breathing out for a count of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that is alternate nostril breathing. I will try to demonstrate again next time, because we are over our time now. I personally like to close my eyes, but you do not need to. And there are some yoga exercises that you can use. Visual imagery is another technique you can use to calm down. And reflecting on positive things, both self-affirmation, thinking positively about how things are going for you, and thinking of others. And at no time is it as important as now to think of others, all the essential workers who are still working and giving us their service. This is a great time for that. And then there is another beautiful activity called chocolate and bricks. And you can find that on the web. If you put in 3-minute motivators by Kathy Patterson, you will see this chocolate and bricks activity, which also is a calming activity. It will to release your frustration and to be able to appreciate something good. And these are some of the resources that I have mentioned and I have included. And these are also some of the other resources. And as I said, several of my books contributed to today's presentation. I'm extremely thankful to AbleNet University for hosting this webinar. And I apologize that some of the slides you were not able to see. And I hope you still got a lot out of this webinar. I hope and pray this will not happen ever again. I certainly will fix the problem before the next webinar. And thank you very much for joining me today. And the part 2 of this webinar will be on September 29th. And as I said, I will share multiple examples of behavior situations and how to address them in that webinar. And then in October, I'm going to be presenting on promoting access, engagement, and learning success of students with significant and complex or severe disabilities. Thank you very much. Have a great school year if you're going back to school, and I wish you the very best. Stay safe and be well. Thank you.